The rejected maid was forced to play the piano, and the millionaire saw something never seen before. Clara Reynolds never imagined that scrubbing marble floors would lead to the moment that changed her life forever. At 23, she was invisible in Stephen Alencar's mansion, just another shadow among the crystal and gold. But when the pianist cancelled and Stephen, cold and ruthless, forced her to perform for his wealthy guests, something extraordinary happened. Her calloused hands found the keys, and suddenly the room fell silent. The melody that poured forth wasn't polished or perfect. It was raw, honest, born from years of hidden pain and buried dreams. Stephen had wanted to humiliate her, to prove his power over even the smallest life in his domain. Instead, he found himself face to face with an artist he'd been too blind to see. That night, as Clara's music filled the mansion with something that felt dangerously close to hope, Stephen realized he was witnessing a miracle he never knew he needed. The marble floor reflected Clara's trembling hands as she scrubbed away the remnants of another lavish evening. Her black hair fell like curtains around her face, hiding the tears that had become her silent companions. In the Alencar mansion, she was invisible, just another shadow moving between crystal chandeliers and golden frames. "Clara," Stephen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his dark suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the last guests lingered in the drawing room, their laughter echoing off the walls. "Yes, Mr. Alencar?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne, mixed with something else: disappointment. The pianist cancelled. Last minute. His grey eyes studied her with the same coldness he reserved for failed business deals. "You'll play." Clara's cleaning rag slipped from her fingers. "Sir, I can't. Not in front of—" It wasn't a request. His words fell between them like stones in still water. "Play or pack your things tonight." The piano keys seemed to mock her from across the room, black and white soldiers waiting for a battle she wasn't prepared to fight. She had learned to play as a child before everything fell apart, before her father's debts consumed their small house, before her mother's illness, before she became nothing more than hired help in houses where she once would have been a guest. "I haven't played in years," she whispered, her hands shaking. "Then tonight you remember." Stephen's voice carried no mercy, only the quiet authority of a man who had never been told no. "Mrs. Thompson will lend you something appropriate to wear." The elderly housekeeper appeared as if summoned, her kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Come, dear, we'll find you something beautiful." As Clara followed Mrs. Thompson up the grand staircase, she caught Stephen's reflection in the mirror at the landing. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it curiosity, or simply the satisfaction of a predator cornering its prey? In the guest room, Mrs. Thompson laid out a simple black dress that would transform Clara from servant to performer. But as she stared at her reflection, Clara wondered if she was being elevated or simply prepared for her own execution. "You don't have to be perfect, child," Mrs. Thompson murmured, fastening the dress. "Just be yourself." But that was the problem. Clara had forgotten who that was. 20 minutes later, she descended the stairs to find the drawing room full of expectant faces. Stephen stood by the fireplace, his eyes following her every movement. The piano waited in the corner like a sleeping giant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stephen announced, his voice carrying across the room, "tonight we have a special performance." Clara's legs felt like water as she walked to the piano bench. The guests' conversations died to whispers, then to silence as she sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if guided by some force beyond her control, her hands began to move. But tomorrow would bring something neither Clara nor Stephen could have predicted. a melody that would change everything they thought they knew about power, about music, and about each other. The first note escaped Clara's fingers like a prayer whispered in darkness. Then came the second and the third, and suddenly the room held its breath. The melody that poured from the piano wasn't the polished performance these guests expected. It was raw, honest, born from years of silent suffering. Stephen's whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips. He had wanted to humiliate her, to prove his power over even the smallest life in his domain. But this was something else entirely. "My God," Mrs. Harrison whispered from her seat near the window. "Who is she?" Clara's eyes were closed now, her fingers dancing across the keys with a grace that made mockery of her calloused hands and simple dress. The music spoke of loss, of dreams deferred, of a young girl who once believed the world held magic. Each note seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words, filling the space between heartbeats with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "She's just the maid," someone murmured, but the words felt hollow against the cathedral of sound Clara had built around them. Stephen set down his glass with trembling fingers. This wasn't the broken woman who scrubbed his floors each morning. This was an artist, someone who had been hiding in plain sight while he congratulated himself on his keen eye for talent. The melody shifted, becoming something darker, more urgent. Clara's shoulders tensed, as if she were fighting against invisible chains. Her music painted pictures of midnight tears and dawn prayers, of a spirit too proud to break even when the world demanded surrender. "Stephen?" Margaret Chen, his business partner's wife, touched his arm gently. "You didn't tell us you had such talent in your household." He couldn't answer. Words felt insufficient against what they were witnessing. Clara's hands slowed, the music becoming softer, more intimate. She was telling them a story without words, of a girl who had once worn white dresses and believed in fairy tales before life taught her that some dreams come with too high a price. The silence that followed the last note was deafening, as if the entire world had paused to catch its breath. Clara opened her eyes slowly, returning from whatever distant place the music had taken her. She looked around the room, at the stunned faces, the tears glistening in unexpected eyes, the way Stephen stood frozen by the fireplace like a man who had just witnessed a miracle. "Thank you," she whispered, rising from the bench with shaking legs. But as she turned to leave, Stephen's voice stopped her. "Clara." There was something different in his tone, something that hadn't been there before. "Wait." That night, something shifted in the foundations of the Alencar mansion, and Stephen would spend the rest of the evening staring at his ceiling, unable to forget the way her music had made him feel human again. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Clara prepared breakfast, her movements mechanical, distant. Sleep had been impossible after what happened at the piano. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Stephen's face, the way he had looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Clara, dear." Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway, her voice unusually gentle. "Mr. Alencar wants to see you in his study." Clara's hands stilled on the silver tray. Did I do something wrong?" "I don't think so, child." The older woman's eyes held secrets. "But perhaps you should go to him as you are. No apron, no uniform, just yourself." The walk down the mahogany-paneled hallway felt endless. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. What did he want? An apology for last night? Her resignation letter? She knocked softly on the heavy oak door. "Come in." Stephen stood with his back to her, staring out the tall windows at his estate's rolling gardens. In the morning light, he looked younger somehow, less intimidating. When he turned, Clara noticed something she had never seen before, uncertainty in his grey eyes. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Alencar?" Stephen. The word came quietly. After last night, I think we can dispense with formalities. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Clara's fingers twisted together. If this is about the performance, I'm sorry if I embarrassed you in front of your guests. I know I'm not trained and... Stop. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his aftershave, see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Clara, how long have you worked here? 2 years, sir. Stephen. 2 years. He repeated the words as if tasting something bitter. 2 years you've been in my house and I never knew. I never asked. I never saw. She looked down at her hands. There was nothing to see. I'm just... Don't. His voice carried a roughness she had never heard before. Don't diminish what you are, what you did last night. He paused, searching for words. It was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever called her beautiful, not even her music. Why didn't you tell me you could play? She lifted her eyes to his. Would you have listened? The question hung in the air like a confession. Stephen's jaw tightened as the truth of it settled between them, that he had been blind, deaf to everything that mattered. I'm listening now. His voice was barely above a whisper, and in it Clara heard something that made her pulse quicken, not command, but request. I learned from my mother, she said softly, before she got sick, before we lost everything. Music was, it was our language. And now, Clara's smile was sad. Now it's all I have left of her. Something shifted in Stephen's expression then, a crack in the armor he wore so carefully, as if her honesty had reached a place in him that money could never touch. In that moment, standing in the golden morning light, neither of them realized they were about to discover that some melodies, once played, can never truly end. The garden tea that afternoon felt different. Clara carried the silver tray with trembling hands, unsure if she was still the maid or something else entirely. Stephen had asked her to join him on the terrace, not to serve, but to sit beside him like an equal. I don't understand, she whispered, setting the tray down carefully. Why are you being kind to me? Stephen's grey eyes met hers across the small wrought-iron table. Because I've been cruel for too long. His voice carried the weight of confession. And because last night you showed me something I thought I'd lost forever. What? The ability to feel. He reached across the table, his fingers barely brushing hers before pulling back, as if touching her might break some fragile spell. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of jasmine and regret, wrapping around them like a promise of second chances. Clara's breath caught. Mr. Allen, Stephen, I can't. We can't. I work for you. I'm nobody. You're wrong. His voice was firm but gentle. You're the woman who made a room full of millionaires weep. You're the artist I've been too blind to see. He paused, vulnerability creeping into his expression. You're the first person in years to make me remember why I started playing piano as a child. You play? A sad smile crossed his lips. I used to, before I learned that feelings were a luxury I couldn't afford in business. He stood and walked to the garden's edge, his shoulders tense with old pain. My mother taught me, just like yours taught you, but when she died, I buried that part of myself with her. Clara rose and moved closer, drawn by the rawness in his voice. Music doesn't die, Stephen. It just waits. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. Hope, fragile and dangerous. Would you? He hesitated, then spoke in a rush. Would you play for me again? Not for guests, not for show, just for me. I'm not yours to command anymore, am I? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross, but both desperately wanted to. "No," he said softly. "You're not mine to command. But perhaps you could choose to stay." That evening, as Clara sat at the piano in the empty drawing room with Stephen beside her on the bench, she realized that some melodies were worth the risk of a broken heart. The first notes she played were gentle, questioning. Stephen's hands found the lower keys, answering her melody with his own, their music intertwined like a conversation in a language only they could speak. "This is dangerous," Clara whispered without stopping. "I know," Stephen replied, his fingers dancing alongside hers. "But I'm tired of being afraid." And as their hands moved closer on the keys, Clara wondered if she was about to make the most beautiful mistake of her life, or finally find the melody her heart had been searching for. 3 weeks passed like a dream Clara was afraid to wake from. Every evening, she and Stephen met at the piano, their fingers finding harmonies that spoke what their hearts couldn't yet say aloud. The other staff whispered, but Mrs. Thompson only smiled knowingly when Clara floated through her morning duties with music still dancing in her eyes. "You're glowing, dear," the housekeeper said, watching Clara arrange fresh flowers in the foyer. "It suits you." But not everyone approved. Victoria Pemberton, Stephen's business associate and longtime friend, arrived that Tuesday with ice in her voice and suspicion in her blue eyes. "Stephen, darling," Victoria purred, finding him in his study. "I hear you've been entertaining yourself with the help." Stephen's jaw tightened. "Be very careful how you speak about Clara." Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken crystal. "Clara, is it? How charming. But really, Stephen, what will people say? A man of your position, playing house with a servant girl. What I do in my own home is my business." "Is it?" Victoria moved closer, her perfume cloying. "Because your investors might disagree. The Harrison deal, the Chen merger. Do you think they'll trust a man who's lost his judgment over a pretty face?" The words hit Stephen like physical blows, each one designed to resurrect the cold businessman he'd worked so hard to bury. That evening, Clara waited at the piano, her heart racing with anticipation. But when Stephen appeared in the doorway, she saw the walls had gone back up in his eyes. "Stephen? What's wrong?" "This has to stop." His voice was carefully controlled, empty of the warmth she'd grown to treasure. "What we've been doing, it's inappropriate." Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" "You're an employee, Clara. I'm your employer. That's all we can ever be." The words hit her like a slap. "Is that really what you believe?" Stephen forced himself to look away from the hurt in her grey eyes. "It's what I know." But as Clara fled the room, tears streaming down her face, Stephen slammed his fist against the piano keys, creating a discord that echoed through the empty mansion like a heart breaking. Later that night, Mrs. Thompson found Clara sobbing in the kitchen garden, clutching her mother's old sheet music to her chest. "He's afraid, child," the older woman said gently. "Fear makes good men do terrible things." "He doesn't want me, Mrs. Thompson. I was foolish to think—" "Oh, my dear girl." Mrs. Thompson sat beside her on the stone bench. "That man has been staring at this garden for an hour, looking like he wants to burn the world down for hurting you." Clara looked up through her tears. There, silhouetted in his study window, stood Stephen, his hand pressed against the glass, as if trying to reach through it to her. Tomorrow would bring a choice that would either bind their hearts forever or tear them apart beyond all healing. The next morning brought rain and a knock on Clara's door that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson stood in the doorway, her face grave, holding an envelope sealed with Stephen's family crest. "He's leaving for New York this afternoon," she said quietly. "Business trip. He wanted you to have this." Clara's hands shook as she opened the letter. Stephen's handwriting was sharp, controlled. "Clara, I've arranged for your recommendation letters and a position with the Matthews family in Boston. You'll have better opportunities there. The car will take you to the station at 3. S.A. He's sending me away." The words came out as a whisper. Mrs. Thompson's eyes flashed with anger. "That stubborn, cowardly fool." Clara crumpled the letter, something fierce awakening in her chest. "No, not like this. I won't let him decide my fate without hearing what I have to say." She found Stephen in his study, packing files into his briefcase with mechanical precision. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered in his grey eyes before the mask slammed back into place. "Clara, I thought you'd be gone? Disappeared like a problem you could solve with money?" Her voice carried a strength that surprised them both. "Is that really what you think of me? Of us?" "There is no us." But his voice cracked on the words. The rain drummed against the windows like an army of tears, matching the storm building in Clara's heart. "Look at me, Stephen." She stepped closer. "Look at me and tell me you felt nothing when we played together. Tell me those evenings meant nothing." "It doesn't matter what I felt." He turned away. "You heard Victoria. This is impossible. Since when do you let others make your choices?" Clara moved around his desk, forcing him to face her. "The man who built this empire from nothing is afraid of what people might say. You don't understand? I understand that you're running." Her eyes blazed with unshed tears and fierce determination, "just like you've been running from everything real in your life since your mother died." Stephen's composure finally cracked. "Don't you dare. She taught you to play piano because music was love made audible, and now you want to silence it forever because it's safer than feeling." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the sound of rain and two hearts breaking in rhythm. "I could ruin you," Stephen said quietly. "Association with me could destroy any chance you have of a respectable life." Clara stepped closer, close enough to touch. "What if I don't want a respectable life? What if I want a real one?" Her words hung in the air as Stephen stared at her, this woman who had walked into his sterile world and filled it with music and light and impossible hope. "Clara," his voice was raw, "play with me, one last time. And if you can sit beside me at that piano and tell me you feel nothing, I'll take your car to the station and disappear forever." Stephen's hands trembled as he looked toward the drawing room, toward the piano that had become their sanctuary, their confession booth, their altar of almost love. But as they walked toward the instrument that had started it all, neither could guess that this melody would either save them or say goodbye forever. The piano bench felt different this time, charged with the electricity of endings and beginnings. Clara's fingers found the keys first, playing the same melody that had started everything, but slower now, sadder, like a prayer for what might have been. Stephen sat beside her, his hands hovering over the keys but not touching them. The space between their bodies was barely an inch, yet it felt like an ocean. "I can't," he whispered. "Then don't play," Clara said softly, her melody continuing. "Just listen." The music that flowed from her fingers was different now, not the raw pain of their first night, but something deeper, more complex. It spoke of love discovered and love denied, of two souls finding each other across an impossible divide. Stephen closed his eyes, and Clara could see the war playing out across his features. When her melody shifted to the piece they had created together those magical evenings, his resolve finally cracked. His hands found the keys. Their music intertwined like lovers' fingers, each note a word in a conversation only they could understand. The rain outside seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Clara, Stephen's voice was barely audible above the music. Don't say anything, she whispered. Just feel. The melody built, became more urgent, more desperate. Their hands moved closer on the keys until their fingers brushed. The simple contact sent electricity through both of them. Stephen stopped playing. In the sudden silence, he turned to face her, his grey eyes dark with longing and fear. "If I touch you," he said, his voice rough, "I won't be able to let you go." Clara's breath caught. "What if I don't want you to?" The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, with the weight of words unspoken and hearts finally ready to break open. "I'm not yours," Clara whispered, echoing words she'd said before. "But I can choose to be." Stephen's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "And I'm not yours, but God help me, I want to be." Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, like the first notes of a song, then deeper, more certain, as if they were finally speaking the language they'd been searching for all along. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "The world will try to tear us apart," Stephen said, his forehead resting against hers. "Let them try." Clara's voice was steady, sure, as if the kiss had given her a strength she'd never known she possessed. "I'm not the frightened girl who scrubbed your floors, Stephen, and you're not the cold man who wanted to humiliate me. We're who we choose to be now." Stephen's arms encircled her, pulling her close. "I choose you," he whispered against her hair, "whatever the cost." But even as they held each other in the golden lamplight, neither could know that Victoria Pemberton stood in the hallway, her face twisted with rage, already planning her revenge. Victoria's revenge came swift and merciless. By morning, half of Stephen's business associates had received anonymous letters detailing his inappropriate relationship with household staff. The phone rang incessantly with investors threatening to withdraw, partners demanding explanations, society pages hungry for scandal. Stephen Alencar, the iron-hearted businessman brought to his knees by a servant girl, Victoria announced when she arrived at his office, her smile razor-sharp. How deliciously poetic! But Stephen stood behind his desk with a calmness that surprised even himself. "Are you finished?" "Hardly. By evening this will be front-page news. Your reputation, your empire, will survive or fall based on my choices, not yours." Stephen's voice carried a quiet strength that made Victoria step back. "And I choose Clara." At the mansion, Clara faced her own battle. Mrs. Thompson found her in the garden, clutching a newspaper with their story splashed across the society section. "They're calling me a gold digger," Clara whispered. "A social climber who seduced a lonely millionaire. And what do you call yourself?" Clara looked up, her grey eyes blazing with newfound resolve. "A woman who found love and refuses to be ashamed of it." The afternoon sun seemed to approve, painting the garden in shades of gold and possibility. When Stephen returned home that evening, he found Clara at the piano playing their song. But this time, she wasn't alone. Mrs. Thompson sat in a nearby chair, and even James, the elderly groundskeeper, had slipped in to listen. "They know," Clara said simply when she saw him. "The staff? Everyone who matters." She rose from the bench and walked to him, taking his hands in hers. "Mrs. Thompson told them how you used to sit in the garden for hours, watching me work. How you started smiling again after that first night at the piano, how love brought you back to life." Stephen looked around at the faces surrounding them, people who had worked for him for years, who had seen him at his coldest and were now witnessing his transformation. "Mr. Alencar," Mrs. Thompson said gently, "we've been waiting for someone to make you human again." The words wrapped around Stephen's heart like a melody, healing wounds he'd carried for too long. "I've lost 3 major contracts today," Stephen told Clara quietly. My reputation in certain circles is ruined." Clara smiled, the expression transforming her face. And I've never been happier." He pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the drawing room as their audience applauded. "Marry me, Clara Reynolds. Be my wife, my partner, my music." "Yes," she laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Stephen Alencar, I choose you too." 6 months later, Clara walked down the aisle of the small church where Stephen's mother was buried, wearing a simple white dress and carrying white roses. Stephen waited at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears. As they exchanged vows, Mrs. Thompson played the piano, the same melody that had brought them together, transformed now into a wedding song. They had learned that love was not about power or position, but about seeing and being seen, about choosing each other every day, despite what the world might say. And every evening, in their home filled with music and laughter, Clara and Stephen sat side by side at the piano, creating new melodies together. A millionaire and his wife, who had once been just a maid with calloused hands and a heart full of songs. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a single note and end with a symphony. As Clara and Stephen's fingers intertwined on the piano keys for the 1,000th time since their wedding, she smiled at the memory of that first terrifying night. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Losing those contracts, the scandal?" Stephen turned to face his wife, his grey eyes warm with a love that had grown deeper with each passing day. "How can I regret finding my heart again?" He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her wedding ring. "You didn't just save me, Clara. You taught me that the most beautiful music comes from the courage to be vulnerable." Their love story had become legend in their small town. The millionaire who chose love over reputation, the maid whose music melted the coldest heart. But for Clara and Stephen, it was simply the beginning of a symphony that would last a lifetime. Have you ever wondered if love can truly transform two hearts that seem impossible to match? Have you found the courage to choose authenticity over what others expect? Subscribe, activate notifications, and share this story if it touched your heart.